Coming up, bad news for Auburn, surprising news for Alabama, and a whole lot more on the way next, right here on AT&T SEC Country Live. Hello everyone and welcome to AT&T's SEC Country Live. My name is Brandon Adams. This is the former Alabama All-American Mike Johnson. We're glad to have you with us for an hour's worth of SEC talk here. Make sure you share the show with your friends on Facebook. We've also got a podcast you can subscribe to on iTunes. We'll have Benjamin Wolt. We'll talk some Auburn with him a little less than 20 minutes from right now. And a lot in between then is there, and as well as we start to sort of get into the heat of the SEC season a little bit.
Tuesday might be my favorite day of the week because we get to talk about last week's games but start building that momentum towards next weekend.
Well, unfortunately for Auburn, one of the things they have to talk about today is not next week's game or last week's game or anything between. It's the dismissal of another player. We'll make that the subject of item number one on our AT&T SEC Country Live First and 10 list. Kyle Davis, one-time four-star receiver that Auburn went into the state of Georgia and pulled away from the Dogs and brought to Auburn. But the career for Davis never really materialized in Auburn uniform as he was dismissed from the team today. Gus Malzahn announcing in a press conference. In fact, here is what Malzahn told the media about Kyle Davis here really just a couple of hours ago.
I just want to let everybody know Kyle Davis has been dismissed from our team for breaking team rules. We wish him nothing but the best moving forward.
Now, for Auburn here, the storyline for me is not so much Davis's dismissal, although it's significant anytime you lose a big-time recruit, but it's how it fits into the other discussion of players who've left Auburn as of late. Byron Cowart leaving the program. You want to talk about Antoine Jackson leaving the program. You want to talk about quarterbacks here like Sean White. Go back to the offseason, other quarterbacks leaving this team.
John Franklin III.
John Franklin III leaving this team. All of this seems to fit into a pattern of, wow, especially from this one recruiting class from class of 2016, this has really been a lot of attrition from one coach, one program. Is this a bad look for Gus Malzahn and all?
I don't want to say bad look, but there has been 14 players that have left or been dismissed from this program since the end of last season. And I think it starts to develop a little bit of a trend. I think that maybe recruits at some point do start to look at that in a negative light. I think this is the deepest position group. If you're going to have somebody leave, you feel good about it being at the wide receiver position at Auburn. You're talking about, Ryan Davis, Will Hastings, Eli Stove, Nate Craig Myers, Darius Slayton. You go on down the list. So you feel good about where they're at specifically this season. But I think the trend of players departing the program, specifically in the middle of the season, and also players getting suspended, it's a little bit of a bad look for Gus Malzahn, I have to admit.
Yeah, one of the things this sets up for me is a scenario in which Malzahn, who I believe for the last few years, this is not just a Malzahn issue. This is true for really all Auburn coaches. Auburn's a volatile program. You're either winning at the highest level or you seem to be on the hot seat there. Malzahn, after another departure, more bad headlines here for an athletic program at Auburn that's already in a little bit of turmoil, you almost have to wonder if there's a loss on this schedule before the end of the season to a team other than Alabama. Maybe you can forgive an Alabama loss here if it means a 9-3 regular season for Auburn. But if it's anything other than that, given everything else that's kind of gone on with the program, somewhat disappointing year for Jarrett Stidham, a real weird, struggle at times between the Auburn offense, between Chip Lindsey and Gus Malzahn. You almost wonder, is this the kind of thing that's going to send that program into more turmoil, and there's going to be more and more questions being asked about Gus Malzahn at that point?
Yeah, I think you have to. When you look at the upcoming slate, you find the game against Arkansas. I'm going to circle that game against Texas A&M. I think that's a must-win if you're Gus Malzahn. You looked at it going into the season. Kevin Sumlin's one of those guys that were on a hot seat, really had a lot of questions about what was going on at Texas A&M. Now you start to circle that game. They got Arkansas coming up, but you circle Texas A&M. They're going to get Georgia. You're going to get Alabama at the end of the year. I'm not sure. I think when you look at the point spread this week for Arkansas, I think Auburn's a 13 or 14-point favorite. Yeah. Alabama last week, 31-point favorite. And so I think that shows you the disparity of the feelings nationally right now about the differences in the two programs. I think that Gus Malzahn has to reel that back in if he's going to feel really good going into the offseason and building towards signing day.
Don Plaisance in our comment section says Bama's little bro needs to learn to behave. And that does kind of pop up. I know that Christopher Walsh had a really interesting piece about that at SECCountry.com going back to last week in the academic issue that was at least reported and alleged by ESPN.com. And there is the element of, this just sort of feels like the kind of haphazard turmoil that Auburn's dealt with a lot in the past. I do think it's important, given all that, for Auburn and Gus Malzahn to keep winning. The Texas A&M game, like you point out,
yes.
Yeah, you can list a lot of other games in that schedule where Auburn's got to sort of solidify itself here a little bit. It can't be quite such a, to use a word I used a moment ago, it can't quite be such a haphazard program.
Yeah, and we don't know the details. We don't know the details about Sean White. Obviously, Cam Petway has had some ups and downs this year as well. And then you point to this situation we don't know what's going on behind the scenes, but it does seem like over the last few years there has been one of that downhill spiral in terms of some of these bigger recruits. And I can't say this enough. I feel like building towards signing day, that may be something in the back of some of these recruits' head is the attrition that you've seen at Auburn. Some of the biggest recruits they've had just haven't worked out and have had to go elsewhere. And so you mentioned it. When you start building towards the end of that season and you look at the schedule and the way things mount up, I think they have to beat everybody, at least except Georgia and Alabama. And I think even then, if they don't knock off one of those, a lot of Auburn fans are not going to be happy the way this season played out, because it's like we mentioned, BA, going into the season. I don't know what Gus Malzahn has to fall back on if a losing trend develops this year. What are you going to say? I need my quarterback in the system?
That's a great point.
I'm not sure. What are you going to be building towards, or what are you telling the AD that you need if you're going to win? Because there's really not any holes in this chart.
That is such a difficult argument to kind of come back against. And listen, I've tried to defend Gus Malzahn. I thought Auburn would have a good season, and I frankly still think they can go 9-3. I still think they could beat Alabama and get to 10-2. I'm not done with Auburn yet this year, but I'll acknowledge that it is a really razor-thin margin moving forward. But to use Mike's point, if it doesn't end the way it's supposed to, that is a very fair question to ask. What else could Gus Malzahn say he needs that he doesn't have? Kevin Steele's done a good job with the defense. He got the transfer quarterback from Baylor. He was able to handpick his offensive coordinator as a replacement for Rhett Lashley. What else could you say? Hey, if we can just give Gus Malzahn this, he's going to be fine. I frankly don't know what you could give Malzahn he doesn't already have, or at least appear to have. I think your point about that's an excellent.
Yeah, I think if there's 4 losses, if there's 5 losses, then there will be something that happens. I don't know if you have to get rid of Chip Lindsey after 1 year. I don't know if you have to look at moving on from Gus Malzahn. I don't know if there has to be a change-up on staff, but something's got to happen. That's my point. You have such a talented roster. You have so much depth on both sides of the ball. You feel like you had a good offensive line, a good defensive line, a good quarterback, depth at wide receiver. What's the change-up going to be? I think that's what Auburn fans are going to be asking a ton throughout the end of the season. Specifically, like I said, if they slip up against somebody other than Georgia or Alabama, if it's an A&M, if it's an Arkansas, if they find one of those slip-up losses in there, I think the questions are only going to start to tumble downhill.
Steve Schau says, we have all the pieces. He means Auburn. It's the coaches and the plays being called. Can't rely on the Wildcat. Can't run it up the middle. Other teams will catch on. Case in point, LSU. They caught on it. To Steve's point, I mean, I don't think there's anything you can describe that LSU loss for Auburn as anything more than just embarrassing. That was not a good day for Auburn, a team that appeared to be on the rise, but going into Death Valley, a place that hadn't won since 1999. It should have had all the motivation in the world, and yet Auburn can't get it done there in that spot.
Yeah, listen, there was a good piece on SEC Country today, too, about Justin Ferguson wrote about the difference in the offensive philosophy. Towards the second half, you really saw Dave Aranda and that LSU defense start to amp up the number of people they had in the boxes, going to 7- and 8-man boxes in the second half. There was no adjustment on the Auburn sideline. They did not try to run the ball outside. They kept trying to hammer the ball up the middle or throw deep down the field. And I went back and watched that game today. You can listen to Gary Danielson on the broadcast say, I don't know what's going on here. It's either 40 or 50 yards or they're running the ball up the middle. I'm not sure what the philosophy is. They have not used the RPO that you thought they would with Jarrett Silver in the backfield. He's not releasing the ball. He's not trying to get the linebackers off balance. And right now, I can't wait to get to this interview later in the show because I don't know what the relationship is between Chip Lindsey and Gus Malzahn. I don't know what the functionality is of that, and I can't wait to find out.
That is Mike Johnson. I'm Brandon Adams. This is AT&T's SEC Country Live. AT&T, a proud sponsor of SEC Country Live. AT&T, entertainment your way. Make sure you switch to AT&T Wireless and DirecTV to stay connected all season long. As Mike said, we'll have Benjamin Wolk. We'll talk some Auburn with him about 10 minutes from right now. For now, though, let's move on to item number 2 on our AT&T SEC Country Live First and 10 list and take a look at the Alabama Crimson Tide. I thought Paul Finebaum had a pretty interesting tweet referencing the analytics site 538.com with maybe a stat that some are going to view as pretty surprising here. The percentage chance, according to the stat gurus, the advanced stat, the math nerds, for Alabama to win the SEC may be much lower than some people would have thought. Apparently just 60%. We'll show it to you here. Here's what Finebaum tweeted. Just 60% chance for Alabama compared to a 30% chance for Georgia. Are you surprised that Alabama's chance of winning the SEC, according to the people who apparently crunch these numbers, isn't higher than that?
I'm actually not surprised, and I'm actually kind of shocked that more people were surprised. When you look at Twitter today, when you look at people that are following along or commenting on what Paul Finebaum tweeted out earlier, it's still double what the second place team is.
Right.
I mean, Georgia's still sitting there at 30%. If you're telling me you got double the amount of odds the number 3 or 4 team in the country has of winning the conference, I think you're feeling pretty good if you're an Alabama fan. I think what's interesting about the stats, and I looked a little bit deeper into it, Alabama actually has a 71% chance to make the college football playoff when you ask them. And Georgia's jumps up as well. I think it's 37% to go in the college football playoff. So it's interesting to look at, and we've talked to, about the idea of having 2 SEC teams in and what happens if this team wins here and there. I think Alabama just has to continue plugging away. I know it hasn't been as pretty as it has been in years past when you've had championship teams at Alabama, but they keep plugging away and keep winning games. And right now, I'm good with 60%.
So there's a big point I think that's got to be made here, and I'll make that in a moment. But let me talk about these numbers here for a second. Now, I got to tell you, I was not good at school. I'm not good at math. I'm just being frank and honest here. And anybody watching here was a better student in high school than I was. I was not very good mathematically, but I've read about this stuff to understand one thing. There's a very simple and fairly boring reason why Alabama's only a 60% likelihood to win the SEC. Even though they are essentially like a 90% certainty to win each of the games between now and the SEC championship, if you add all those together mathematically, and the math people tell you this, the chances of something 90% likely happening repeatedly is only about 50-something percent. So, I mean, you're talking about
right.
basic math here. This is 90-something percent times out a few times, and you finally get down to about a 60% chance of winning the SEC. This is the same thing that Alabama's dealt with in each of their last few years. 90% likely to win any one game, but winning them all is still essentially a coin flip.
Yeah, and I agree with the numbers for this simple reason. I think you and I obviously agree with them more than most people because we've paid attention to Georgia,
right.
Probably the most of the national people on Twitter have. When they look at that stat and they think Alabama's number one, has been number one, has won the SEC the last 3 years, how can their percentage not be higher? Well, I don't think those people have been paying as much attention to Georgia as you and I have and see how good Georgia is and see how good possibly Auburn is in a couple of those matchups as well. So when you crunch the numbers and you give 60% to Alabama and 30% to Georgia, throw Auburn in there with I think what was 6%, LSU still at the bottom with like a little over 1%. I think it starts to add up, and I don't think it would shock either me or you to see those numbers.
Jared Seegers, by the way, in the comment section saying we're having a little bit of a technical difficulty with our signal. We'll see if we can get that working and taken care of, and we'll keep that going here today on AT&T's SEC Country Live. I mean, for me, the one thing I think you've got to say about Alabama here, and the reason why I wanted to bring this topic up into the show is I think that the numbers speak for themselves, and what that indicates is a situation where the Alabama fans, for by and large, are just simply too confident. Now, they've got the best team in the country right now. I don't think that's a debate. Even in the SEC, I think Georgia's closing the gap on Alabama, but I don't know that gap is completely closed as of yet. Alabama would still be a favorite over Georgia in a neutral site game, and Alabama would be a favorite over any team in the country, I believe, on a neutral field, including Clemson, who beat Alabama last year. But that status as a favorite, I think Alabama fans have a tendency to take too far. Alabama is not as much a favorite as the average Crimson Tide fan thinks, and one of the points I've tried to make all over the course of the last few months here on AT&T's SEC Country Live is Bama fans, be careful that you don't expect this to be too easy, because it's not just the Georgia game here. College football has a way of being surprising, and Alabama fans, I think, have a tendency to be just a little too confident.
Well, yeah, no, I agree. No, I said all offseason that I felt like Bama would probably catch a loss at some point during the year. I didn't think it would be Auburn, and I didn't think it would be FSU, but I thought somewhere in the middle you might see Alabama trip up. And really, I don't know if you can blame Alabama fans for being that confident. When you look at how their schedule has played out for the last 10 years in conference play, I mean, they've made a lot of noise. They've rarely lost one game, it seems like, when you look back all the way, going back to 08. You go undefeated 08, 09. You were undefeated last year in the regular season. So I don't know if it's there. There is a lot of confidence about the talent you have on the field and about how hard it is for these position groups to just kind of regroup every year and bring back these players. I think if you ask Alabama fans and if you put a poll out on like Twitter or Facebook about any position group, if it's the best one in the country, Alabama fans would say that position group is the best one in the country. DBs, linebacking core, defensive line, I think they would point to that position group being the best in the country. And it's just not true in all those cases. You have great linebacking cores at some of these other places, running back groups, wide receiver groups that can challenge Alabama in different phases of the game. That's why you play the game on Saturday, because it's all about matchups.
Robert Bailey in the comment section says we need to take a break for leadership rep. We'll see if we can get that figured out, get back up and running for you. Somebody said that Gus Malzahn had hacked our broadcast. Maybe Scotty Shoemaker said that Gus Malzahn had hacked our broadcast. He doesn't want us talking about the bad news with the Kyle Davis dismissal and more bad publicity for Auburn. Maybe that's the case. Maybe the Gus bus came in here and ran over our Facebook signal.
Yeah, I was just reading the Gus Malzahn headline on the front of SECCountry.com, and he's responding to former Auburn player Heath Evans, and Gus Malzahn says, quote, TV guys, they've got all the opinions.
Yeah,
so maybe we did get hacked by Gus Malzahn. You never know. Maybe he thinks we have too many opinions.
Shirley Farmer says correct or go to commercial. Here's the good news, Shirley. We don't have any commercials. This is just us. Now,
yeah.
we'll do some sponsor reads, but as far as commercials go, the great thing is there's nothing to fast forward here. We got no commercials. So we'll stick with you. We'll get it figured out, and maybe we are about to get this thing all taken care of and get this up and running. We appreciate your patience here on AT&T's SEC Country Live today. Jared Seeger says you look like one of those triggered GIFs on Facebook. I guess maybe your face was sort of playing on a loop over and over again on the broadcast. Maybe that's what that was. Yeah. So anyway, thanks for being patient with us. We'll see if we can get that figured out and taken care of, and we'll see what we're going to do on that. Maybe somebody will give us some clues here about what we might need to do. For now, why don't we do this? Let's move on and look at item number 3 in our AT&T SEC Country Live First and 10 list. And it's kind of an interesting development in a rivalry that really used to mean something. Maybe this year we assume might not mean as much anymore, but all of a sudden a little spice added to it. It's item number 3 in our AT&T SEC Country Live First and 10 list, and it's the LSU Ole Miss game on Saturday. Now, when Ed Orgeron met with the media earlier this week, when it comes to this game, Orgeron said all the right things, that this is 2 teams on the field and has very little to do with him. In fact, here is how Orgeron, through his Cajun drawl, said it a little earlier in the week.
This game is not about me. Again, I'll say this to you. I had a tremendous opportunity at Ole Miss. I didn't get it done. But the past is the past. This is way behind us. Me and my family have moved forward. I'm so happy to be an LSU Tiger. This is another SEC game. It's LSU Ole Miss. It means a lot. And it has nothing to do with me. This is about the team.
So that's the kind of boring coach speak you expect to hear a coach say, but it's worth pointing out that is not what Orgeron said when he spoke to Chris Lowe from ESPN, apparently, before he made that statement to the media. Here from Twitter is Lowe's account of what Orgeron told him about the game, that it's just another game, because the truth is the whole time I was there, meaning his time as Ole Miss head coach, I was wishing he was here at LSU. For me, this is a problem. Do you agree?
Yeah, I think it's a problem. And I think what's funny is when you saw the Ole Miss fans, they were saying we were wishing the same thing. We were wishing you were at LSU as well. And I think that tells you all you need to know about this rivalry. And I don't even know what they call this rivalry anymore, but it is a little bit of a rivalry. It does have some sticking points when you look at the history of this game. LSU hasn't been as good as you think they have historically against Ole Miss, and I think that goes back to Ed Orgeron's time. They're obviously not a successful run for Ole Miss. I think this is a bad look, really, for Ed Orgeron. When you look at that press conference being really politically correct, and then Chris Lowe sends out what probably is the more honest truth of the 2 answers, I think it's a little bit of an interesting look for Ed.
Yeah, and here's the reason why I don't like it, because I understand the need to want to talk up your own program and kind of excite your own fan base. It's sort of like a politician making a speech. Your job is to give red meat to the people who like you, and it's not to worry about what Ole Miss fans think. But there is a way to show some respect to your previous employer. Yes. I mean, part of Orgeron's reputation as a football coach is the fact that Ole Miss trusted him enough to hire him as head coach. Otherwise, he's just a guy that's kind of a quirky personality. But Ole Miss said, we'll endorse you enough to make you an SEC coach. Orgeron was helped by that time at Ole Miss. And to kind of disrespect them for saying the whole time I was there, I was thinking about this. It's sort of like that, meme everybody sees on the internet now of the guy like looking at the other girl as his, walking down the street. I mean, it's like the human embodiment of that. And for me, that's a disrespectful thing to do. And it's the kind of distraction, I believe, that LSU does not need coming off 2 big wins over high-profile teams like Florida and Auburn. I actually think that Orgeron just made this Ole Miss game tougher to win.
I think he did too, and I think when you look at somebody disrespecting your program, obviously Ole Miss has been, a little bit of a, I don't want to, touch anybody, but a dumpster fire here recently this year with the firing of Hugh Freeze, with everything that's been going on with the Houston Nutt lawsuits and everything recruiting-wise with the sanctions that are coming down with them. And there has been a lot of problems at Ole Miss, and so I think right now it's less about Ole Miss for me right now, and it's more about LSU, because Ed Orgeron has been building something. And all of a sudden you get rolling downhill and you start getting these wins. Why go that route if you're him? Why say that to Chris Lowe, who is going to put it out on Twitter, is going to put it out on ESPN, and you're going to talk bad about Ole Miss? And you're right, they're the people that gave you the shot. What if Ed Orgeron at some point has to move on from LSU? Because that was the talk 2 weeks ago. Are you going to be jumping? Right. Are you going to be jumping at the opportunity to hire a guy like Ed Orgeron, who obviously talked bad about a previous employer?
Here's what I think this speaks to: that the LSU wins over Auburn and Florida probably don't prove everything that Orgeron and LSU hopes they prove.
Yes.
I think there's this thought that maybe these wins prove that Orgeron's a better manager of this program than people gave him credit for, and the situation in Baton Rouge is better than some people probably assumed that it was. But maybe those were just good wins for a talented team. I mean, LSU still got a lot of talent. Maybe beating Florida and beating Auburn just a byproduct of having a lot of talent. And Orgeron, difficulty managing the program. Maybe that is actually kind of still true even with these wins, and the fact that he kind of falls on his face going back to play Ole Miss this particular Saturday, maybe that's an example of what LSU fans, Joe Oliva in particular, hope isn't true about Orgeron.
There's no doubt in my mind that it's true, because I've watched the team, and my questions after the loss specifically to Troy is, why are these guys not playing with a lot more emotion? And I think that a lot of LSU fans, and we've talked about it on this show a couple times, Duke Riley going back to give the pregame speech, or I guess whatever, talk to the team before they played Florida, kind of riled him up. It's been kind of pointed to that he's the reason for the turnaround. Why do you have a former player come in that's going to cause a turnaround? How many times is Ed Orgeron going to have a former player walk through? Saw Brandon LaFell on the sideline this past weekend. How many times is Ed Orgeron going to get a former player to walk through and give that rah-rah speech? At some point, He's got to take ownership of this team and be the head coach and be the guy that can get these players up on the sideline. We're going to see if that plays out for the rest of the year.
All right, we'll get Benjamin Wolt. We'll talk some Auburn with him, including the Kyle Davis dismissal coming up in just a moment. Let me also give you an update on our technical situation. If you're watching us on Facebook Live, obviously you've seen, and I've never seen this happen before. I'm watching on video right now. It's like a sped up video. It's kind of, it's it's strange to see. It's kind of cycled through. I mean, we've seen a lot of different things on Facebook over the years, both in our personal use and on our show here. And this is something I haven't quite seen before. But if you look in our comment section, for those of you who normally watch the show on Facebook, and 99% of you, that's the way that you typically watch it. But if you look at the top of our comment section, pinned right there is a link to watch this show on YouTube. Maybe this is the silver lining to our issues here, the fact that we are on YouTube each and every day. You can watch this show on YouTube. So the link is right there to check that out. My understanding is there are no video issues watching it on YouTube today, so you can check it out there on YouTube, and we'll hope to get the Facebook situation cleared up here in just a moment. In fact, maybe that's happening right now. A guy who never has these kind of technical difficulties because he's always on top of everything is Ben Wolk, who covers Auburn recruiting for SECCountry.com. He joins us here from Auburn, Alabama right now. And I guess, Ben, let me start here with the big news of the day from Auburn. That's the dismissal of Kyle Davis from the team. This is another loss for Auburn off that 2016 recruiting class that looked big and potentially prosperous for Auburn. Hasn't really worked out that way. But in Davis's case in particular, how big of a loss is this for the Tigers?
I mean, I think Mike alluded to this a little bit earlier in the show. I mean, if there's a position group that Auburn can afford to lose players right now, it's probably at wide receiver. I mean, Kyle Davis is an exceptional player, talent-wise, but it's not like he hasn't made any game-changing plays or anything like that. I mean, he's had a couple highlight plays that have made it on SportsCenter. But from a actual X's and O's Auburn figuring this thing out standpoint, I don't think that it's a major loss. I would say that it's, from the recruiting side of things, looking at that 2016 class and looking at some of the high-profile guys that they brought in and then haven't really panned out. I mean, it's certainly disappointing probably from the coach's perspective and also from the teammates' perspective. But again, I mean, this was a guy that was not there the entire spring. He misses the season opener because he was suspended with Sean White and Cameron Petway. So, I mean, I think that the writing was sort of on the wall there, and I think that this was sort of a last straw kind of deal for Gus Malzahn.
I want to talk about Jarrett Stidham in a moment. Let me do a quick follow-up to that before we get to that. We kind of talked about this off the top of the show as almost like a PR issue, that it's more bad headlines for a program that's had a few of those here lately, and I mean athletic program, not just football program. Is this actually bad PR for Malzahn, and does this make Malzahn's job here tougher over the course of the rest of the season, given the fact that it's kind of another negative story that exists on the internet about the Auburn program right now?
I would say that this story specifically is probably not bad news for Gus Malzahn. I mean, I think that he was sort of put in a position where he didn't have many choices. I mean, when you give a guy a certain number of chances and they keep, messing up those chances, I mean, you don't really, as a head coach, you only have so many options. But I would say big picture, I mean, when you bring up all of the negative headlines that keep coming up and you see Byron Cowart leave and Antoine Jackson leave and John Franklin III leave, and that now you've got to dismiss Sean White and Kyle Davis, it starts piling up. So as they start piling up more and more, I would say, and I think that you brought up Christopher Walsh's story that he wrote on SECCountry.com, where he sort of pointed out this perception problem that Auburn has nationally, in terms of the cleanness of their athletic department. I mean, I think this is a case-by-case basis sort of thing, where this one specifically doesn't mean a whole lot, but I think when you add it to the big picture, it certainly doesn't help things.
Kind of a weird story that kind of came out of the LSU game about Jarrett Stidham talking about his freedom to change plays, the line, call audibles. That seems to be a common part of college football. For the Auburn offense, maybe not quite so much. Are we making too much of this outside the Auburn program, the fact that Stidham may be just a little bit more limited when it comes to that kind of freedom than other quarterbacks are?
I wouldn't say that it's just the people outside the Auburn program. I think there's people that are covering Auburn that are making this somewhat of a big deal as well. I do think that it was a little bit overblown on Sunday when Jarrett Stidham when he was talking about this. I mean, he was asked very specifically about a very specific situation, whether or not he was allowed to check out of that play call or not. Gus Malzahn said today that Jarrett Stidham has more influence and more decision-making over this offense than any quarterback he's ever had, dating back to his time as offensive coordinator and in his time as head coach at Auburn. So I do think that it might not be that he has – I mean, I think that Gus Malzahn just in general probably doesn't let his quarterbacks have as much control over the offense as some people would like. But by the sound of things, from Gus Malzahn's perspective, he feels that Jarrett Stidham has more than enough control over things based on how much control Jarrett Stidham has over it compared to other quarterbacks in Gus Malzahn's past. But it was something that was brought up to Gus Malzahn today, and it was something that he was eager to answer just based on some of the noise that was out there on Sunday after Jarrett Stidham made those comments. So I think that it's a little bit overplayed, but I think that some of that, it's just sort of what's going to happen when you lose games that you probably shouldn't lose. Fans and beat writers and national media outlets, they're going to find all the reasons they can to sort of take a knock at Gus Malzahn if they can. Ben, one of the things I wanted to talk about was obviously the inability of Gus Malzahn and Chip Lindsey to kind of change during the second half last week. It seems like, as LSU's defense continued to evolve and they continue to load the box a little more, we didn't see any of the same changes. We didn't see any of the same changes on the offensive side of the ball for Auburn. And that led me to ask questions about the relationship really between Gus Malzahn and Chip Lindsey. Do you have any insight to what that relationship is like, especially during the games? Yeah, well, and I mean, that was something that Gus Malzahn was asked about pretty firmly today. I mean, he was asked, you keep saying that you have no control over this offense, that yet when you look at all the statistics in terms of when you're running the ball versus when you're passing the ball and how you're using the play action, when you talk to fans, I mean, fans clearly think that Gus Malzahn still has huge control over this offense. So he was asked point blank, how do you respond to these types of things when you hear all these people sort of questioning the truth about whether or not you're giving Chip Lindsey full control? Gus Malzahn was quick to say, I mean, this is Auburn's offense, and under Gus Malzahn, Auburn is always going to be a run-first team, and that's not going to change. But the point of bringing Chip Lindsey in was that he was going to offer the necessary balance to sort of go along with that play-action style that Gus Malzahn likes. He was adamant in saying that he has stepped away from the offense this entire season and that Chip Lindsey has been doing everything. They've got a really strong relationship. I mean, I don't think that there's any bad blood or anything behind the scenes going on that's negative, but I think that the question is worth bringing up. How much does Chip Lindsey feel like he's in control of the play calling when you've got a guy like Gus Malzahn who really wants this to be a run-first team when that doesn't necessarily line up 100% with what Chip Lindsey's done in the past? So I think that there are maybe some philosophical battles going on there, but from a play calling in the game type of thing, I think that Chip Lindsey does have full control over things right now.
So, Ben, obviously you write a terrific recruiting blog covering Auburn recruiting every day for SECCountry.com. There's kind of an interesting Auburn recruiting story of the day. It's the Coinus Miller commitment here, and the video of Miller making his announcement obviously received as good news by almost everybody but one person. Let me show the video here to the folks who maybe haven't had a chance to see this. I want to get a reaction. Here's Coinus Miller announcing his commitment to Auburn, and take a look at Miller's dad, who is not nearly as excited as you think the dad would be of a player that just committed to Auburn. Let's take a look at this. So there you see the big screen. The Auburn hat comes on. The roars take place. Thank Coach Arrington on Twitter for putting this out there. You're about to see the lights kind of come on. You'll be able to see a little better here. Look at Miller's dad. He's not smiling. He's shaking his head no. He's not happy about this whatsoever. Now, Ben, obviously we see everything when it comes to recruiting, and you could speak to that as well as anybody because you've seen so much of this kind of stuff. But what do we make about a big win for Auburn not treated as good news by the father of the young man who made the announcement?
Yeah, well, I'll say that's a hilarious video. I'm really glad that you showed that. Just a little insight into the Coinus Miller recruitment and the story behind that kind of. His dad is a huge Alabama fan, which I think you can probably gather from that video. His mom is a huge Auburn fan. So you can see in that video his mom is sort of waving that Auburn hat at his dad. I asked Coinus way back in the spring when he visited Auburn for half of his spring break, which really was the time that Auburn sort of made the move for Coinus Miller and everyone else was playing catch-up from there on. But I asked him, in your house, I mean, who generally is the one that's making the decisions? Is it mom or dad? Who usually gets their way? And he joked at the time and was like, well, this is my decision, but mom does usually get her way when it comes to decisions. So this is just another example, I guess, in the Miller household of Mama Miller getting the way over Papa Miller. I think, he actually did after that video. His dad did come and he got the mic and he gave a little speech and he was very gracious and very, he had some very good things to say, but I think that it made for a pretty funny video. And you can sort of see the look that Coinus is giving his dad in that video where he's kind of like, oh man, I don't know if I should say anything to my dad right now. But I mean, again, this is something that I think has been trending for a while, and I think his dad knew what was coming. I think that it just, in the moment with his son actually putting the Auburn hat on, it was a little bit of a head shaker for a big Alabama fan.
Well, Ben, it's always great to have you on AT&T's SEC Country Live. Obviously, your insight into what's happening on the field for Auburn and in recruiting is always fun for us. We'll look forward to having you again on the show again very soon, and we'll talk to you again as well.
Awesome, guys. Thank you.
Good stuff there from Benjamin Wolk, covers Auburn recruiting for SECCountry.com. And by the way, for those of you who've kind of switched over to see us on YouTube, we appreciate that. Let me give a few shout-outs here. Do you mind if I do that?
Go ahead, let it rip.
Let me say hello to Terry Cruz, checking us out here on YouTube. Appreciate that. Alan Block says Orgeron has to bring in former players because nobody can understand what he's saying. Arlen, we appreciate you weighing in on YouTube as well. Devin Glenn, he's enjoying the broadcast today on YouTube. We appreciate that. Different people offering different suggestions. We appreciate that as well. Everybody always wants to help, but you're always glad for the people who want to provide just a little bit of help, a little technology assistance. Listen, we always appreciate that, and we'll look forward to taking a lot of comments here on the YouTube version of the show. We appreciate you all watching there. And by the way, if you have friends who like to watch the show, if you could sort of share this link with them, just let them know we're here. We actually, I guess I'm probably derelict in not promoting this more. We're on YouTube every single day.
Right.
And the problem is it's sort of hard to see the comments on YouTube if I'm paying attention to Facebook. But if you like watching on YouTube, we stream live on YouTube every single day. So if you like watching on YouTube, you can watch that. Maybe I'll get the two screens set up here where I can see comments on both sides.
Yeah, that'd be awesome. I think it looks great on YouTube as well. Obviously, unfortunate that we had to switch over, but I see some of our good friends, Andrew Stanley, Cliff Nelson, Keegan Montgomery, Jason Scroggs. Glad y'all came over to watch on this one.
By the way, Andrew Stanley wants you to be Auburn head coach.
Yeah, I don't know about that.
I think you're, first of all, I want to keep Mike where he is right here on this show, but if you do leave us for a coaching job, my guess is Auburn. First of all, what are you, Heath Evans? All of a sudden, you're going to send your notes out with your resume for the Auburn job?
He retracts though. He goes, Mike doesn't usually have good things to say about Auburn, but he does speak the truth, and I appreciate that. That's what I always try to do.
Somebody wants to talk about Adam Anderson, the recruit committing on Thursday. Why don't we do that right now? We'll make that the subject of item number 4 on our AT&T SEC Country Live First and 10 list. And I think there's a very simple point to be made here about Adam Anderson. He's a 4-star linebacker from Rome. We'll show you some of his highlights. He's obviously a dazzling player, a guy that had a chance to play 5-star quarterback Justin Fields a little earlier in the season, came up with 2.5 sacks there in that game. Jeff Sintel, who covers Georgia recruiting for DogNation.com, kind of weighed in on Anderson today. He was on my podcast, Dog Nation Daily. The decision for Anderson comes down to Georgia or Alabama. Here's what Jeff Sintel on Dog Nation Daily said about this 4-star linebacker and a one-time both UGA and LSU commit. Here's Jeff.
Nation's number 2 outside linebacker, probably going to be a 5-star when everybody re-racks him and sees him at the Army All-American game. He's about 6'4", about 220. If he ever gets into a big-time strength and conditioning program with the training table, he's going to look about 6'5" and about 255 and run like a gazelle. And he's going to pad a lot of sack totals at either Alabama or Georgia, that's for sure, in the coming years.
So Jeff says it's either Alabama or Georgia for Anderson, but here's what the online chatter is right now, Mike, that Georgia's actually the favorite here. And if Georgia does win with Anderson on Thursday, a lot of people watching right now don't know who Anderson is, but here's why this matters. This will be one of the rare times lately that Alabama has really thrown all of its cards towards an SEC prospect or a prospect in the South and not been able to come away with that. But it's happened a few times here. Remember, Alabama entertained Justin Fields, the 5-star quarterback, on an official visit. A couple days later, Fields committed to Georgia. Go back to last year. D'Angelo Gibbs, Walter Grant. These were players that Alabama wanted. Georgia got them. Kirby Smart's obviously a former Saban assistant working for Georgia now as head coach. Is he becoming a legitimate threat to Alabama as a recruiting power?
I don't think there's any question about it. When you look at the success he's had this, not only this year, but last year, and going back to some of the classes he's already been able to try to put together and recruits he's getting. And it reminds me of like when you talk about quarterbacks or teams that are on a hot streak, people that are just doing well, and it seems like they're really in rhythm on offense and everything's going well on defense. I feel like that's what Kirby is in recruiting right now. He's on a hot streak. He really has everything go well. I don't know if these hosts are a lot of fun, that are they're hosting these players, or everything's going in the right direction. But I think he's definitely, if you're saying he's not a legitimate threat to Alabama right now, if you're an Alabama fan, you're lying to yourself. Because if you look at the classes he's putting together and the ability that he's had to get all these guys stacked up one on another, the depth that they're going to have the next couple of years is a huge thing. Alabama's sitting right there right now at 31 in the rankings on Rivals right now. I think Georgia's still outside the top 10 at 12, but when you talk about the SEC, that's a big deal. Alabama has not been that deep at all. I think Alabama obviously will close well. They'll get a couple of prospects, probably a couple switches, specifically when some of these coaching hires and fires go down down at the end of the year. But I definitely think that Kirby is a huge competitor when it comes to getting these #1 classes.
And listen, I think there's a chance when it's all said and done that Alabama still has a better class than Georgia this year. I don't think Alabama's going to stay down at number 31. They're going to climb before it's all said and done, even if they don't get back to #1. But one of the reasons why they may not get back to #1 is because Georgia's getting players that Alabama would have thought it would have gotten in years past, and maybe having a hard time holding on to commits it currently has right now. Think about a defensive end like Stephon Wynn at a certain point. Maybe he decommits from Alabama and flips over to Georgia. I think it's one of the reasons why I believe that Georgia's actually having more success in the field right now than I assumed they would. But by 2018, 2019, I think Alabama is at that point not just being challenged by Georgia in recruiting, but challenged by Georgia in terms of supremacy in the SEC, because Alabama's process, the #1 aspect of that process is find better players than every other team in college football. And very few schools have the ability to copy that aspect of the Alabama process. Most schools just can't recruit to that caliber. I think Georgia can, though, and right now Georgia is.
Yeah, Georgia is, definitely. I think another aspect to look at this is what happens when Tennessee if Butch Jones is fired. I think you've already seen guys like Lynn J. Dixon start to second-guess their commitments. Obviously, he decommitted over the weekend after the loss to South Carolina. How else does that affect other prospects? Look at guys like J.C. Horn, a guy who committed right here on SEC country a few months ago. How does that start to affect him? Alabama is heavy right now on DBs. They've offered a ton of DBs. They really have those guys at the top of their chart. They didn't sign what they wanted to last year. I think they've got to go out and try to find some of those guys, recruiting-wise, some of those 4- and 5-star DBs that Nick Saban can get into this program. I think that's going to be the biggest key for them. Are they going to be able to close like Alabama has closed in the past? Because that's been the biggest target. And I think that Alabama has been widespread recently, in the last couple of years on what their targets are. They're all in on DBs right now. I think they have to close hard with
That's a really good point. Now, Cliff Nelson in the comment section, big LSU fan, says LSU can go out there and take some of those players Alabama wants. In the past, that's certainly been the case. Here's been the problem with LSU recruiting lately. They've actually let some kids from the state of Louisiana get away to Alabama. Think about Devontae Smith last year. That's a name that comes to mind in that regard. And LSU just has not brought in that big-time quarterback yet. Maybe Miles Brennan turns out to be that way. Maybe Lowell Narcisse, I guess, has some chance of doing that. But had the official visit with Justin Fields, it goes nowhere. They're going to go after Justin Ross right now. Maybe that turns into something. It's still probably way too early to see. Couldn't hold on to Felipe Franks. Maybe that's no big loss. But, LSU, what's held LSU back, because they've certainly recruited well in almost every other position, but they haven't really brought in that quarterback.
Well, I think what's interesting when you look at the dynamic between Alabama and LSU is it seems like every recruit that Alabama wins over LSU turns out to be an All-American at Alabama. That's what's great.
That's a really good point.
When you look at the handful of guys, Eddie Lacy, Landon Collins, Cam Robinson, just look at the list they've been able to steal from the state of Louisiana. Those guys always turn out to be excellent players for Nick Saban. I think LSU's got to get that pointed in the other direction just a little bit if they want to start climbing back in that direction in recruiting rankings.
All right, I have a hot take about something that probably doesn't.
Been waiting all day for this bit.
It probably doesn't deserve this, but I do kind of feel strongly about this. It's the subject of item number 5 on our AT&T SEC Country Live First and 10 list. And to kind of explain this issue, you have to kind of go back to the past a little bit, because Vanderbilt has just had a lot of weird stuff happen this year. Speaking of Alabama, we were just talking about. Think back to the game when Vanderbilt was getting ready to play Alabama. Nife Leal, the defensive tackle, after at the time what looked to be a big win against Kansas State, he goes on the field after the game, talks a little trash, challenges Alabama. We've played this a few times. We always have fun with it. Many of you remember this, though. Let's see it one more time.
Before you go, what kind of win is this for the program? We expected to get this. When you come to our house, we show you how to play some SEC ball. It don't matter where you're from. You're going to know what ball we play. We're going to next week ranked, that's fine. Alabama, you're next.
And Alabama won the game 59-0. Then you had the game against Georgia, a game where before the game, Derek Mason, the Vanderbilt coach, seemingly unprovoked, kind of took a shot at Kirby Smart, who thought that Smart was trying to trick him, trying to, provide some sort of subterfuge with the quarterback situation with Jacob Eason, Jake Fromm. Mason kind of took that as a challenge, and Derek Mason kind of went on the record with, I don't want to say this is trash talk or bulletin board material, but it certainly was an attention-grabbing statement from Mason. Here's the Vanderbilt coach.
I believe, Fromm, is the guy. I believe Easton's an extremely talented quarterback, but that's up to Kirby, who he decides to go with. He's not fooling me. If that's what we think we're doing here. That young man, Fromm's won ball games. He just came off a 48-0 win. We can quit with the coaching dramatics. When it's all said and done, they're 5-0. They're a good football team with lots of talent. They're playing extremely well. And, hats off to Kirby because he's done a great job.
Now, you might not even be aware of this, in that Georgia-Vanderbilt game, a game that Georgia won 45-14, at halftime, Mason said that he wasn't worried about Georgia because his defense was built to stop Georgia. He said that at halftime of the game. This is a team led by Derek Mason this year that I just think has been goofy. and unbecoming of the SEC. And the latest example of that is, take a look at this video. Now, I'm not going to lie to you. The video itself is funny, but when you add together everything else going on at Vanderbilt, it's sort of an embarrassment for a program that's already probably too embarrassing on the field. Here's a Vanderbilt wide receiver who thinks he got to have a penalty called on Ole Miss, and maybe it was a bad call by the officials. He takes his towel out and throws his towel like it's a penalty flag. Now, I laughed when I saw this. You're laughing right now.
Yes, it's funny.
I'm not telling you this is not funny, and I'm not trying to be the most serious guy in the world, but there is an element when you add all this together that this is a team that's kind of more interested in just being goofy, just challenging Alabama, challenging Georgia, two teams that Vanderbilt has no business challenging, and that leads to receivers kind of creating their own viral video moment as opposed to just sort of drilling down and being a part of the nuts and bolts of football. This, for me, even though the video was funny, was actually a little bit of a problem.
No, I'm going to give you a counterpoint, though.
Okay.
I think that this is a route that maybe Vanderbilt should be comfortable with taking. Listen, I agree, it's goofy. I don't think it was a good look for Derek Mason to say what he said. Obviously, the defensive lineman's tactics of saying Alabama's next didn't work out for him. But I think when you look at Vanderbilt historically, this is not a bad look for them. They've got to change something, in my opinion, if they're going to climb to the top of the SEC. What they've done historically, what they've done for the last 100 years or whatever it's been in the SEC, obviously has not worked out. So if Vanderbilt, if the smart kids have to start being weird and have to start being goofy, then I'm okay with it. Try a different approach. Get Derek Mason in there to trash talk. Whatever you got to do, try something else, because when we look at the history of Vanderbilt, it just hasn't worked the way everybody wants it to.
You're making a great point. I agree that you might as well try something different because what you have been doing hasn't been working. But this Mighty Mouse routine ain't it. This thing where you're like, bring on Alabama. We're built to stop Georgia. You're getting your teeth kicked in by these teams.
Yes.
Whatever this is ain't working. Now, if you want to say we're smarter than everybody else and all the the dumb kids go to the other schools, we'll take the smart kids. At that point in time, that's a brand I can get behind. But I can't get behind this brand, this sort of lovable losers. Whatever this even is. I don't even know what this is.
See, I think I see it a little bit opposite of what you see this, because I don't see it as, we're going to be, all the dumb kids go to the school. Maybe that's what they're saying, but I think that what they're saying, like, by doing all this stuff, by doing this crazy stuff and acting out, I think they're saying, look, we can be goofy too. Well, you dumb kids might go to the other schools, but we can act dumb too. We can have fun. We can step outside the box and do things differently. I like the sound bites that I've seen from Derek Mason all year, to be honest.
Rainman58 says something's in the water with the Tennessee teams, Vols and Vandy, and I can't believe that you like those sound bites. You don't like Nife Liao saying bring on
No, I didn't say that. I said
like
Derek Mason. I like Derek Mason.
Derek Mason at halftime of the Georgia Vanderbilt game saying
what else is he
going to say?
My point is, what else is he going to say? Oh, you know what? We're getting our teeth kicked in. This hasn't worked out the way we thought it would. I guess we'll go home now. I don't know what else you say if you're Derek Mason at halftime of some of these games. I don't think there's a good answer. I don't think it's a good look. I think when you're getting killed, I don't know what it was at halftime against Alabama, 49-0 or something. Yeah. There's not anything good you can say. You might as well kind of chuckle at it and say, you know what? We're built to stop this.
So now we're talking about Vanderbilt way more than we should. But I do got to say one more thing about this. If I was a Vanderbilt fan, here's what I would want. I would want my team to talk trash to a team that you actually could beat. How about you talk trash to Ole Miss? Because Ole Miss is terrible.
What? I mean, come on.
If you're going to tell me you're built to stop a team, how about you stop Ole Miss? Don't worry about Georgia and Alabama. They're top 4 teams in the country. But Ole Miss, how about you stop them?
Well, I mean, when's the last time Vanderbilt's been favored?
How about
to be
Florida?
If you can't trash talk to some of these teams, then when are you going to be able to trash talk? I mean, honestly, they probably haven't been favored all year in any of the games they've lined up against, and it's not going to start anytime soon. They got to be allowed to talk trash somewhere. It's not going to be against Ole Miss.
This would be like me looking at the camera and saying, "Floyd Mayweather, I'm coming for you. I'm going to knock you out." There's no credibility behind it because there's no accountability here. I'm not going to fight Floyd Mayweather, and if I did, he's going to knock me out. This is Vanderbilt essentially saying the same thing. We're built to stop Georgia. We want Bama. How about you want Ole Miss? Because that's a game you could win.
And my point is that it's just a good thing they don't have a dorky coach on the sideline pushing his glasses up on his nose and saying, you know what, the X's and O's didn't work out.
That's a good point.
That's a look they've had for forever.
So here's the funny thing. And like our hardcore people who are with us on YouTube right now, one day we're going to be back on Facebook Live. We're going to have a Vandy fan pop in the comment section and say, why don't you ever talk about Vanderbilt? And like the hardcore viewer is going to say, there was a day back on YouTube where they talked about Vanderbilt for like 5 minutes. Yep. So if you were on YouTube, you had the longest Vanderbilt discussion in the history of this show. But nonetheless, we should probably get back to where our bread is buttered. How about the 3rd Saturday in October, Alabama, Tennessee? That's a pretty good one to talk about right now. We'll do that here with item number 6 in our AT&T SEC Country Live 1st and 10 list. And I thought that Nick Saban was asked a really good question in his weekly press conference. Is a rivalry still a rivalry if it's not close anymore? And Alabama, Tennessee, to most media members, has not really been all that close as of late. Nick Saban, as you might imagine, has a slightly different take on this. Now, I'm going to split this up into 2 clips so we can play both parts of it. But Saban, even though he kind of gets a little preachy here and it almost sort of sounds like one of those jet engines sort of taking off from the runway, he sort of slowly works himself up into getting a little bit angrier. This is actually a pretty thoughtful comment from Saban. Yeah. Here's how he answered back if the Tennessee rivalry was still a rivalry, given the fact that Alabama's been good and Tennessee's been terrible.
I also think that the 2 games that we've had here lately, same kind of situation. You know, their team is pretty much a 500 team, and we're pretty much where we are, and we struggle to beat them. I think you all, like always, you're always looking for all these assumptions that you make because they have issues, they have problems of some kind of way. Why can't that be a great motivating factor for them and they come and play their best game of the year? Y'all ever think of that? Or, you know, so you can look at the glass half empty or half full, not to get to the Coke bottle.
And you can't tell because that's just an audio clip we're playing, but he actually kind of picks up the Coke bottle as kind of a prop for his half empty, half full, which is obviously a callback to his rant where he was like, why don't you ask the Coke bottle about, was it Kirby Smart? Was that Kirby Smart taking the Georgia job that he did that about? One way or another. Yeah. That's a little bit of a callback humor there from Nick Saban, but also a pretty good point. I mean, I kind of agree with him a little bit on that.
You definitely have to. I think that what he's saying has a lot of merit to it. I think it probably had a lot of thought going into it. Nick Saban does everything calculated. He probably knew he was going to get that question when he walked in the door, and I have to agree with him. I think that, you know, it's all about looking at things from a different perspective. And if you are in the Tennessee program, I think that probably what these players are thinking and what that coaching staff is thinking is we go on the road and beat Alabama, we can probably save all of our jobs right now. I mean, you have to think of it from that angle as well. So I thought it was a well thought out point.
Prime Teague in the comment section says Alabama and Tennessee hasn't been a rivalry since Shula was the head coach. And
whoa now. Whoa, now we're getting.
Oh, you just made
we're getting into the heyday now.
You just made big number 78 man on that one.
We're getting into the heyday now. There's some good wins back in those Shula days.
Big number 78 all of a sudden getting upset about that one.
Yeah, what was that? 05 went into 05 we beat with Mike Shula.
So here's the thing. I understand where Prime is coming from on this, but for me, that's not the way that I view rivalry games. What I think makes college football special is you don't have to be a good team to have a good rival.
Yes.
You know, the Egg Bowl. I mean, Ole Miss, Mississippi State, neither one are very good. But those 2 teams hate each other. You have a hard time finding any 2 people, any 2 families, any 2 entities, period, that hate each other more than Ole Miss and Mississippi State hate each other. Yeah. They're not playing for an SEC championship, but they're playing for the championship of each other. So I don't think that you have to be good to have a good rival. And I think that's the point that Saban's trying to make there.
Yeah, absolutely. Listen, when I got to school, I can't remember what the exact record was, but I think it was something like Alabama 43, Tennessee 37, something like that. Like it was a lot closer when you looked at the history of the rivalry. I think Alabama was only maybe 5 games over 500 against Tennessee. And obviously now that Nick Saban's taken over, you know, it's 10 in a row, going for 11 in a row as a 35-point favorite this weekend, and it looks a lot more lopsided now, but this is still a lot on the line. When you look at the recruiting basis for both these teams, a lot of these parents that are being recruited, a lot of these booster members, all that, they remember all the heydays of these games, especially back in the 90s, at the late 90s. And so I think, like he said, you have to look at it from everybody else's perspective, not just your own.
I want to play a little more from Nick Saban in a moment. Before that, I gotta ask you a quick question. This is totally off the subject. I apologize. So we're on YouTube today. We had some Facebook issues. We're on YouTube, and for those of you watching, we appreciate you doing that. I didn't sign in, but it's my name on here. How does it know that it's me?
I have no idea. Because I tried to comment and asked me to sign in, and I was like, I'm just not dealing with that right now.
Does anybody that's helping us with this show today, how does YouTube know this is me?
I don't know. Maybe you were already signed in.
I've never commented on a YouTube video in my life.
I don't know. Apple knows way too much about me on my computer already. I don't even have to sign into anything. I'm already signed in.
All right, let me hear a little more from Saban. This is actually the first part of that clip. Can I talk about the Alabama-Tennessee rivalry?
I also think that the 2 games that we've had here lately, same kind of situation. You know, their team is pretty much a 500 team, and we're pretty much where we are, and we struggle to beat them. I think you all, like always, you're always looking for all these assumptions that you make because they have issues.
We essentially get the basic gist of the point that that clearly that he sort of views as a rival, and I think he's right about that.
Well, listen, and it goes back to my time there, and obviously I've been in these shoes a couple of different times. That's right. I played Tennessee, was on that 08 team that was Phil Fulmer's last game. I was on the 09 team when Terrence Cody had to make the field goal block at the end. You see Nick Saban jump. Lane Kiffin's on the other sideline. I remember those games. Those were close games. Those were hard-fought games. Only recently has this really been lopsided, and not even lopsided every year. I think when you go back 2 years ago, there was a sack at the end of the game for Alabama to win. So I know know it's easy to throw it in this thing where, hey, they've won 10 times in a row, and hey, there's this thing started to get out of hand a couple times, but this is a Tennessee football team that's going to come in very hungry to get a victory for their coaching staff and their program. I promise you that Alabama will have their head on a swivel.
All right, let me do item number 7, AT&T SEC Country Live, first and 10 list here. And this is one of those things that, I wanted to talk about this yesterday. We shouldn't have time. One of the things I think is a real problem for Butch Jones at Tennessee right now is the way that former players and the families of former players are kind of speaking out on him and what's kind of not been going well for the program, including this from Jalen Hurd. Not Jalen Hurts, the Alabama quarterback, but Jalen Hurd, who coming into last year was thought to be one of the best running backs in the SEC, but it didn't work out for him in Alabama, and his stepdad's got some thoughts on why it didn't work out here. This was on Twitter. I don't quite know how we got this public. I'm not sure that Jalen Hurts' stepdad intended for it to be, but he says some interesting things here. Easiest offense to read. Whichever side the back is lined up on, they're running back across the quarterback's face. Line always blocks sideways. And in South Carolina, the defense in this case, stunts to the side they know the ball is coming to. Kelly hit before the line of scrimmage every time. Welcome to Jalen's world. That's a pretty blunt description of the Tennessee offense. And
yes.
Oliver Conley, who does some X's and O's stuff for us at SECCountry.com, basically went on Twitter and backed it up and said, you know what? That's basically what I saw there as well. That's an indictment for Larry Scott and for Butch Jones, the guy who hired Scott, right there.
It absolutely is. And I think what's concerning about this statement, if you are a Tennessee fan, is that you can't really argue against it.
No.
I mean, you can't really argue against it. I know that they've done some things, but I think where they really, really hit the wall was without the dual threat quarterback. Once Josh Dobbs left and Quentin Dormady took over, I think you really didn't have that ability to pull the ball like they have in the past, where Josh Dobbs had the top end speed to really make you hurt on some of these read option plays. Now with Jared Garantano, and there's a little bit more of that as well, but there's definitely a lot of merit to it. When you see their offensive line moving kind of side to side, it's almost like they're running a read option with kind of a stretch principles on the offensive line, and it just has not developed well. And you saw it right there. Will Muschamp's smart enough to where he's going to slant the defensive line that way, and you're not going to be able to find any open gaps. And it's going to leave Quentin Dormady or Jared Garantano standing there with the ball, and all of a sudden they're not going to know what to do with it. And I think it's been a very basic principle of Tennessee for a couple of years now, and you're seeing it really come to a head this year.
I'm being very frank with you here for a moment. I will be shocked if Butch Jones does his weekly press conference next week. I believe it's on Tuesday, for Jones. Actually, I guess it's Monday, like a lot of these other coaches are. But whatever day it is, Monday or Tuesday, I'll be shocked if Jones does his weekly press conference. I'm assuming he'll be fired after the Alabama game. And he won't be fired because of the Alabama game. I think he's fired because of Georgia and South Carolina.
Yeah.
But you don't want to put an interim coach against Alabama. You could lose 100-0. I think that you have to have Jones coach this week, and I think that he will be fired on Saturday, Sunday, whenever.
Yeah.
But he's not coaching Tennessee next week, I don't believe.
Well, I'll be shocked because for 6 months has been the thought that we're going to get 7 weeks into the season, and if he's 4-3 after 7 weeks, I thought that was the only way he could save his job. It's shaping up like it's going to be 3-4. I thought there was a chance it could be 2-5, but he finds a way to beat Georgia Tech at the end, and that shapes up his record a little bit better than it probably should be right now. But I'm with you. I'll be shocked if next week we don't hear about Butch Jones on his way out, and we start throwing around candidates on this show for whoever is going to take over his job.
I know this is dumb. Just hear me on this for a second. And listen,
probably not the first dumb topic we've covered.
No, look, this is totally dumb, and we're running late, and so I'm going to try to do all this kind of quickly here. What if they won? You can't fire them then.
I know
you can't. And that's the dangerous thing. And 35-point underdogs don't win very much. But I mean, Michael, who runs the board for us, he bets. You see a 35-point dog win about once every couple years. About once every couple years, a 35-point dog will win a game outright. What if they did? You can't fire them then.
I tell you what will be even crazier, and I saw this stat the other day. Since the 2007 Independence Bowl, when we played Colorado when I was a sophomore, Nick Saban has beaten every unranked team since he's that they've played at Alabama. I think the record's something like 78-0 in the last whatever games against unranked teams. So that'll be something else you can throw on top of it. That'll be absolutely crazy if they win this game.
All right, let's do item number 8, AT&T SEC Country Live, first and 10. Andy Staples, pretty interesting piece at SI.com. I actually want to hear from more of our Florida fans, although Florida fans have been a little quiet this week. Don't think I haven't noticed Gators fans, by the way. He, in talking about some of the hot seat rankings for various coaches, I thought had a pretty interesting statement. He says, and we'll show it to you on our screen here, that the rank and file section of the Florida fan base has completely checked out on Jim McElwain. Is that true? have rank and file Florida fans. I don't know if that means the less erudite fans. I'm not quite sure what he meant by rank and file. But is there a large pocket of Gators fans who've already given up on McElwain?
I don't think it's impossible that that's happened right now. I think for the most part, the majority of the fan base is still tuned in, specifically with Georgia 2 weeks away and what could be a pivotal game for Jim McElwain's tenure there as the head coach. Because I think this is kind of the game it reminds me of in 2008 with Tommy Tuberville and Nick Saban, where these two programs, Tommy Tuberville was a good coach, and then Nick Saban goes in and beats him 36-0, and you can feel things start to slip for Auburn, and you feel like Alabama's building something, and then all of a sudden you have to make that change in Auburn. I feel like this could be one of those games for Georgia and Florida because Georgia is obviously trending in the right direction. Is Florida going to allow itself to slip even further? And depending on how ugly that game gets, I think a lot of people are still paying attention, I guess is my point.
Yeah.
And they're also going to be able to face Florida State later in the year. I think a lot of those Florida fans still want to know what they have in this head coach.
I agree with you that there's still opportunities for Florida to turn its season around. A performance against Georgia could do that. Remember, Florida State has beaten Florida 4 years in a row.
Yes.
That would be an opportunity for Florida to kind of get that rivalry back the way it's going to go. There's some games left in the Florida schedule where McElwain could win back his fan base. I just don't know if Florida's good enough to do it.
I'm not sure either. I think they've got to come a long way. They've got to get better up front. Florida State has been kind of a debacle. They had a good win this past weekend against Duke, but that's why I think these fans are tuned in because there's so many questions about Jim McElwain. You want to say, hey, I'm going to show up. I'm going to watch on Saturday because I want to know what we have. I want to know if this is the guy that's going to get us over the hump or if seeing Florida State with Jimbo Fisher and seeing Miami with Mark Richt and seeing Georgia with Kirby Smart, if we have to move in another direction in our head coaching position.
Terry Crews brings up a good point. Georgia has really injured the reputation of a lot of coaches this year. One of the final nails for Butch Jones, probably. Dan Mullen was like the second best coach in the SEC until Georgia beat him 31-3. It's another chance for Georgia to do that against Jim McElwain in a couple of weeks. Also here real quick, I said, what if, now we're joking, this is not a serious thing, but what if Tennessee beat Alabama? You couldn't fire Butch Jones. People respond back to say, Joe Brummel says his record's only 14-21 in the SEC. The main squid says you got to look back at Butch's body of work. It's not very good. Totally get all of that, but you understand this. And I do Dog Nation daily. I lived through this at Georgia when it comes to Dennis Felton as the basketball coach. Terrible coach, but won the SEC tournament. You can't fire the guy after that.
Yeah.
I mean, the risk that you run by letting him coach against Alabama is if he were to win that game, and it'd be one of the bigger upsets we've seen, but not the biggest of all time. If he were to win that game, you really can't fire him after that.
I will say this. It'd be probably the most improbable upset that I've seen specifically in the history of that rivalry. But you're right. I think that's what's interesting about looking at that game is what are you going to get out of Butch Jones. But for me, for my money, we talked about the Florida fans, the rank and file fans checking out on Jim McElwain. I think the players at Tennessee have pretty much checked out on Butch Jones. I feel like his message is not being accepted.
And that's one of the reasons why they are such a big underdog to Tennessee here this week. All right, why don't we do this? Let's save 9 and 10 on our rundown. Let's do those tomorrow because this is kind of fun stuff, and I want the whole audience to be able to see that. What if we just go ahead and skip ahead to our Champion of Life? We'll have some fun with this, and then we'll get ready to wrap up the show. But let me say this before we do. For those of you that did follow us over to YouTube today, I really appreciate you doing that. Yeah. We obviously love having this conversation with you, and honestly, this is my first time interacting on here. I wasn't sure we'd be able to do the comments and be able to see what you were saying to us, but it's kind of nice to know that we can, kind of nice to know that you're here, and we just really appreciate that. We hate when you have technical difficulties, but the thing you got to know about Mike and me both is we love doing the show. We love a chance to talk to you, and we just really appreciate the fact that you would kind of go out of your way to be a part of that conversation with us.
I agree. I've seen a lot of people in the comment section that really like the YouTube link, and I'll ask y'all to keep that in mind for your future viewership. If you ever want to come back to YouTube and view us on here, we'll try to start interacting on this channel as well. I think that's been a good thing for us today. The silver lining in a tough day as far as Facebook Live goes has been being able to interact on YouTube.
All right, Champion of Lifetime now. We close out the show this way every day, even here on YouTube as well, as opposed to Facebook Live. And I feel like such a hypocrite for this because I'm about to laugh at something that I am more than capable of doing. More than capable of doing. And Dick Stockton is a much better broadcaster than I could ever hope to be. But he had not the greatest moment during his NFL telecast on Sunday where he's reading a promo. And if you ever do a game on TV, the way it works is what you call like a set director, someone like that, will kind of hand you the card and you essentially just read what's on the card. Well, in this case, Dick Stockton read exactly what was on the card, very much like Ron Burgundy. Here's what happened on the Fox telecast.
On the Visa halftime report, Kurt Terry, Howie, Michael, and Tony look on graphic for the final 2 bullet points.
Look on graphic for the final 2
young
bullet
offensive
points.
tackle right
Poor
there.
Dick Stockton. And listen, that's not even a good note to give a guy who's doing a show like that because, we do a show sheet and a rundown every single day. And like for a lot of my shows, when we'd have guests that we'd call on the phone, I used to put the phone number on the show sheet to help the producer, so you'd know, or she would know who to call when it's time to call. I had to stop doing that because I almost read the phone number on the air like 1,000 times. And there's so many examples of that where if you leave yourself an opportunity, you'll read something you're not supposed to read.
It'll happen. Listen, this has been interesting for me to kind of get into the feel of doing this show. But I can't tell you how many times I've looked down and written a personal note to myself and thought, okay, just make sure you don't read that. I have to exit out and mark all over it once I get done.
Like a lot of sponsor copy will say, put in your own voice in parentheses right at the beginning. Put in your own voice. AT&T, a proud sponsor of that. Like, it's so easy to do that kind of stuff. So you know what? I'm going to laugh at Dick Stockton. The truth is, we've kind of all been there before, and he's obviously a legend in this business. Hey, thank you all. You're legends to us, legendary viewers. We appreciate you being with us here today on YouTube. We'll hope you'll be back tomorrow on Facebook Live. With technology, you never know. But thanks for your patience. We'll see you tomorrow right here on AT&T SEC Country Live.